Welcome newcomers. Something like the Steam Deck makes emulation easier than ever to do, especially when using a mouse with this, unless you have an incredible amount of patience. Download EmuDeck through the browser. Click to install and set it to install on the SD card or the Steam Deck itself, and there, it's installed. Now move your ROMs to the relevant folders or navigate to the folders you want to install it from and go to Steam ROM Manager. Then hit scan after you set which emulators to include and generate app list, and now artwork will be added to Steam along with the games. In most cases the emulator has been optimized for Steam Deck use, so no need to adjust these emulators on a case-by-case basis most of the time. You may need to add BIOS files into the emulators like the PS2 emulator. Just go to desktop and add them according to each emulator. When I finished installing, I realized I had achieved a childhood dream. I have access to nearly every game that has come out in my lifetime on one device. No, actually I have access to almost every game ever on one handheld device. The only thing stopping me from putting them on this device is storage limit. As a child I used to love the Game Boy Color. It was my first handheld and I carried it everywhere I could. Being a kid who loved tech, I always dreamed of having a machine that could play all the games, not just what came out, but old stuff too. I wish there was a cartridge that I could put into the Game Boy that had all the games ever made for a Game Boy on it. Many years later, I got my wish with emulation. Of course, the Steam Deck is the king of portable emulation with its ability to play everything up to the PS3. This is the culmination of a history of me wanting a portable that plays everything. I had to try this on other devices before, with the varying levels of quality. As a way to commemorate the end of the 3DS, I got both a new 3DS XL and a PS Vita that I modded and dumped the better part of their gaming libraries onto each device. The 3DS holds most of the DS library, and the PS Vita a decent amount of PSP games on it. Maybe someday I'll get all PSP games on one Vita, but for now I'm good. I even got every game prior to the SNES running on both devices. Of course, I also have a full-size gaming PC that can play every single game these devices can play, and then some. In my opinion, the handheld form factor gives a lot of these older games a better look than what a big TV or monitor would, since they are shorter and they may not hold up graphically until you get to the PS3, Xbox 360 era. AAA games, and for whatever reason most of us are more forgiving of ugly era games on a smaller screen. When it comes to retro games, whatever that definition is to you, because the PS3 and Xbox 360 are almost 20 years old at this time, emulation is clearly the best way to experience them. It's the best balance for having a lot of games, in my opinion. The Steam Deck makes this emulation a trivial thing to do with PS3 games being playable. I know I sound obsessed, but I still remember when people claimed the cell architecture was just too complicated to ever emulate. It's not perfect yet, and a lot of the heavy hitters like Infamous and God of War 3 are really hard to play even on the most powerful of PCs, but it will get there at some point. For now, it's great for emulating third-party games that never got a PC release and will likely never get a re-release or remake, like several of the Silent Hill games, strange crossovers like Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe, Lollipop Chainsaw, though I hear there is a remake being worked on, and Resistance. The great thing about the deck is that the developers for these emulators can optimize them to one specific piece of hardware down to the metal. While stuff like Switch emulation is still a bit rough, it can possibly get to one-to-one level with the Switch itself and possibly surpass it. I love emulation. For various reasons, I wasn't able to play games as much in my teens as I would have liked to. So once I started work, I built a gaming PC and started to buy up a lot of those games that I wanted to play, mostly from the PS3 and Xbox 360 era. However, I began to find out that some of those games that I wanted to play were stranded on old consoles without a PC version available. All those awesome PS2 games were just out of my reach and just too expensive to get a hold of. I didn't have all the space to put all the consoles in my home. But then I learned about emulation and all the ripping tools I needed to copy friends' games. Emulation really feels like it democratizes game collecting and the inevitable endpoint for game collecting, making gaming and gaming history accessible to all. It allows you to play any console game without needing the original hardware, and often making the game look many times better than it ever did on original hardware, usually making it look like how you remembered it, not how it actually looks like. Amazing how the mind can trick you. It also has the added benefit of not needing to manage extra boxes around your TV. you could keep all the game files on your PC, be it a laptop, desktop, a Steam Deck, or any handheld gaming PC. None of the need for special adapters to connect the NES to a modern TV, none of the need for HDMI switchers or an old CRT. Emulation makes keeping a lot of games around convenient and gives gaming hardware a bit of a childlike magic. In my opinion, there is something just magical about having all this on one machine. It makes any emulation device into the magic do anything device you think about as a child. The game console with every game ever on it. No, it's not the same as having those shelves, but it has its own coolness to it. A complete console library, several console libraries, all on one machine that takes up 1/1,000,000th of the space of the original cartridges or CDs would take up. That's pretty cool in and of itself. Make no mistake, I love those big walls of games that you see in game room tours. That visceral feeling of walking into a game room and seeing games from dozens of consoles is just so amazing. You see how trends change, how we went from cartridges to CDs to cartridges again, and going digital altogether. But there is a reality of this that no one talks about, probably because it kills the fun of collecting. Let's be honest here. It's incredibly inconvenient from a space point of view and a accessibility point of view. If you're going to go with a mostly physical collection, you're going to need a spacious house or apartment, and if you live with family or a partner, they need to support your hobby and be willing to accommodate it. Some of us have a wife, husband, girlfriend, or boyfriend who can't deal with them having a clustered desk at home, let alone shelf upon shelf loaded up with hundreds of games and a TV surrounded by dozens of game consoles. It can be a bit selfish to indulge this hobby because of this. Emulation lets you do all this without the need for all this space. Yeah, it kinda sucks that you can't indulge the ambiance that comes along with surrounding yourself with paraphernalia and hardware, but the experience of the games is more important than the ambiance. Besides, if you want to carry over something from the original experience, splurge on a controller that matches the original console. You can get software like Launchbox or RetroArch that generates artwork so you get the cool covers and even the manuals and short videos that tell you about the game. This all digital approach can fulfill another childhood fantasy. Of course, it's more convenient from a pure accessibility standpoint. I can look through my games library on my PC without the need to physically look through a shelf or have a game disappear for years in the back of a drawer until I emptied the drawer out years later, which makes me seem lazy, but when you have collected several hundred games over the course of a decade of having a Steam account and dozens if not hundreds of ROMs and ISOs, the convenience can't be underestimated. Nothing ever gets misplaced. Like literally, unless you name it something weird, the game can be found provided you remember what it's called. It also means that I don't have to worry about the environment destroying my games, because the humidity caused the contacts on a cartridge to oxidize or a CD to rot. Yes, you get the issue that games do disappear off of online stores due to licenses expiring, and it's not worth paying to license these things out again, but at least you get the added benefit of being able to find a copy online as abandonware. Yes, it's abandonware, not piracy. We have games like Forza, Driver San Francisco, and Project Cars 2 being delisted and disappearing from digital storefronts because they didn't sell well and companies don't want to spend the money to license the use of cars, or they were just too cheap, or perhaps to force you to buy the latest Forza game. You can't get the old movie tie-ins in Spider-Man games or Beanox Spider-Man games because they lost the rights to the licenses. Do these games deserve to disappear just because it makes no sense, in inverted commas, to make them accessible? Yes, hard drives fail too, but it's easier and cheaper than ever to back terabytes of data on an external hard drive. This all-digital approach gives an added layer of protection since games can't just disappear at some point in the future because all the physical copies have been destroyed. I'm not gonna act like I'm into this just for the preservation. I'm interested in having experiences for myself, but this preservation is a worthwhile side effect. The NES was released in 1986. The Atari 2600 was released in 1977. At time of speaking, these machines are around 35 and 45 years old. How long before they all start failing and not a single functioning one is left? Once all the transistor caps have bulged out on them, how long are the cartridges going to last once ROM rot starts destroying them one by one? Preservation attempts are being made to keep the hardware working, but most of us don't have humidity controlled spaces that will keep these things in good condition. Like it or not, they will cease to work and a piece of history will be lost. Emulation lets games live on forever. Games have always been an old digital process. Movies were recorded on film at one point, and degradation of that caused defects in the original that we now think of as being the way the film looked like. It's actually a sign of age. Games never developed something like this. Books yellow and fringe with time, and while they can be retyped, these often has the side effect of certain phrases or words being taken out or changed altogether. Some of it is due to modern sensibilities, but human error plays into it too. Do this enough times and entire books completely change. Games don't really age or fall apart the way those mediums do. A copy of a ROM is a perfect copy. No subtle changes in language or intention without someone having to go into the code and mess with it. They can corrupt over time, but it's not prevalent. Besides the screen they are being played on, games don't really age or degrade, and there are currently attempts being made to replicate the look of a CRT on a modern display. Since they don't wear out like old books or vinyl records, they are perfect for preservation, always new. If we let them be tied to specific hardware, then they will be lost to time. With modern tech, we can get a best of both worlds scenario with people creating perfect hardware emulation using FPGA hardware, like what's found on the Analog Pocket or the Mr. FPGA. This is hardware level emulation that makes the circuitry behave like the original hardware, making emulation even more flawless. Eventually, emulation in both the hardware and software forms are all that will be left. It will be the future of game collections and how most people will experience older games. And it's important that emulation is seen as a worthwhile thing, otherwise most of the medium will just disappear every few decades.